Yeah. Okay. Certainly use the they say they or many or many of this and certainly people really see focus on we went through this in 735, this is now 29, that should not go right when regions needed together to create many slightly line here back so this budget was the way the shit of my data is created for the actual and then also for us to be able to create uh, true data surrounding availability of work-based learning ways in straight and so we're stuck to an effect so endless reference fibers and their work in also in hand was big purpose legislation for whether the house or the sort of zero forward providing updates and we create a dashboard board, raise that data structure, create certainly want to there will be some of the players who certainly want to say a big thank you to our student members for their support. You can see that every day, but Cruz was testifying when he went through the headline, so next to Senator Reynolds for that stage. Certainly want to say thank you for all of that support. We also want to say a big thank you to not to Ruth Watkins, Strada, Kevin is here once again to show you support from the Strada. Certainly, we've not been operating on the progress that we have since lost about community system as well as activating DOS. There is also semi-consistent count resolution 33. For many of you with grade board involved in creation of graph resolution, graph that really creates a coordinated work-based learning task force, which to some degree, emphasis more on the Americas in case well. And certainly also have involved with this Iran, so natural for us to get the Bengal glass again. So really excited with the progress that we get into the past. We are, as you know, who are bringing up this task force meeting today, meeting September, meeting December, then you will have our final treatment, which eventually is very useful for it to actually move forward. So we have a lot of rolling points. And one fast, what we really want to focus on today is really about basically. We really want to try to help this way understand where we are, the state of it comes to work-based learning. That's a decade we're really concentrating on what's going to the employer perspective. That's really, you really can't have work-based learning without employers and with willing and pay. And so, so we really want to make sure we're figuring out a response. They want to say, here's thank you to assets for use to better Louisiana. There, to see when we have surveying in this next hiring in the field with us massive data like hiring. We've got the more submissions this morning. So you'll see some of the early trainers of that in our conversations later. But we also want to sort of recognize that work-based learning doesn't really happen in the United States. It happens just all over the world. And there are some other places in the world where there's significantly more established and much mature and talented than there happen in one of those places. So we're really lucky today to have the representation from the Wealth Institute at the University of Waterloo. And so it was just thinking about giving a hand over to and Mary, the director of the Wealth Institute, so that I'm sure telling more of the story, but this, for some, in some sense, to me, it moved our church in every way. So 30 years ago, I was very happy to spend a year as a postdoc at the University of Waterloo, the Institute for Combinatorics and Optimization, which is my area of math. And while I was there, I'm super impressed by the University of Waterloo. For about 50 years, they have integrated based learning into their curricular structure. So basically, you graduate from the University of Waterloo, you have to do an internship, co-op as part of the structure of their degree. And as you might imagine, over those years, they went quite well back actually have implemented this, here's like hands, and it's really emblematic of the way in which the nation counted that. So, with no further ado, we're going to hand over to, looks like we have two terrific presenters today, Anne-Marie Fallon and David Drury from the Most Learning Institute. They're going to tell us what there is to know about learning going to be counted over those schools and we'll consider that. Let me hand over to that. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dr. Denley. I might just look to the audience for a few thumbs up. The audio on our end is coming in pretty weakly. So is everyone hearing me okay on your end?
We can hear you really well.
Oh, and look at that. The audio is actually better. So
I just got my teacher voice on. So yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today. Anne and I are very pleased to offer a brief introduction to our view on work integrated learning. You'll hear us abbreviate that as WIL. From a Canadian perspective, in Canada, WIL has become a key strategy for connecting higher education with workforce needs, helping students develop skills through real world experiences, while supporting employers and regional economies. So we think that that's relevant to your task force. So in this presentation, we'll share some information about how our model of WIL works, what we've learned, and how it might relate to your context there in Louisiana. So let me start with a very quick story that might reframe how we think about education and work. Let's go back to the year 1906. An engineering professor named Hermann Schneider is at the University of Cincinnati, and he introduced what would become the world's first co-op program. His idea was very simple, but at the time it was very controversial. In his view, many of the most important concepts and skills couldn't be fully understood in a lecture hall. They had to be learned through real, practical experience. So he designed a model where students would alternate between studying and working, applying what they learned in real settings. That idea became the foundation of what we call WIL today. More than a century later, that same insight still holds. If we want students to be prepared for the workforce, learning and work can't be separate. They have to be intentionally connected. So again, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is David Jury. I'm the Associate Director of the Work Learn Institute at the University of Waterloo. I lead research on work integrated learning systems, employer engagement, and talent pipeline development. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by my director, Ann Fannin, who has an impressive over 20 years of experience advancing WIL practices, partnerships, and policy at both the national and international levels. We're calling you today from the Work Learn Institute at the University of Waterloo, where we focus on advancing WIL through research, consulting, and education. We conduct innovative, data-driven studies to better understand how WIL creates value for students, employers, institutions, and communities, and to identify what makes these experiences most effective. We also partner with institutions and system leaders in over 31 countries to design, implement, and strengthen high-quality WIL programs tailored to their specific goals and regional workforce needs. Additionally, we provide training and resources to build capacity among educators, employers, and policymakers so they sustain and scale WIL over time. Just a brief background on who we are so you can contextualize some of the messaging. In our very brief time with you today, we'll start by defining WIL from the Canadian perspective. Then we'll situate WIL within our context, including how it was developed nationally, how it operates in our context at the University of Waterloo, as one example of scale and practice. And then from there, we'll highlight some of the benefits of WIL, and finally take a step back and look at how you can build the core elements of a work integrated learning ecosystem. So very briefly, a crash course, if you will. At its core, we understand WIL as an educational model based on experiential learning that is intentionally embedded in a program or course with clear learning outcomes and academic oversight. It gives students direct, structured opportunities to learn through real or simulated workplace contexts. But importantly, and this is the key point, it really goes beyond the experience alone. It has to be integrated with study, meaning students actively connect what they learn in the classroom with what they do in practice. And equally important, and one of the things that separates WIL from other pedagogies, is that WIL involves active collaboration between students, institutions, and external partners, such as employers and community organizations, with shared responsibility for the learning experience. And finally, WIL is designed to develop employability, building not just technical skills, not just the skills that students would learn in the classroom setting, but things like adaptability, confidence, and professional judgment. So when we talk about WIL, we're not just talking about work experience, we're talking about intentionally designed curriculum-based experiences that integrate learning and meaningful work. This slide highlights that WIL can take several different forms depending on how the experience is structured. You're probably already familiar with some forms of work integrated learning. You might call them work-based learning, things like cooperative education and internships. I won't really go into much detail there, but there's a whole suite of them that we consider in the international context and here in Canada as being forms or types of work integrated learning. So, co-op really briefly, programs that are likely paid, typically structured in 4-month work terms that alternate between academic study. Sometimes this could take over 4 or 5 years of a student's time in education. Internships, similar, but sometimes longer, perhaps lasting a year. They can be paid or unpaid. These two forms of WIL have really been the staples or the backbones of most work integrated learning programs. You might also be familiar with forms of WIL such as practicums, shorter, typically unpaid, supervised by a licensed professional, often in fields like health or education. These are very common. But there's other forms of work integrated learning, such as community and industry research projects, or as we call them, CHIRPs, where students work on applied research or real world challenges with external partners. Across these models, duration and structure and purpose can vary. They can look very different, but they all share a commonality, which is that they're designed to connect academic learning with real world application. Over to Anne to talk a little bit more about work integrated learning at Waterloo.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Dave. And so we want to have a broad discussion about will in Canada today. But as you already heard from Tristan, the University of Waterloo's co-op model is the primary reason that people come to us at WorkLearn to understand how work integrated learning is developed at Waterloo and to get guidance and advice on building their program. So I thought we would take a couple of minutes. I'll give you a really brief overview of the model, some of its outcomes, and then we're really happy to take questions at the end. Next slide, please. So just to help situate you, the University of Waterloo is located in the province of Ontario, just north of the border, so about a 2.5-hour drive from Buffalo or 3.5 hours northeast of Detroit. Waterloo is sometimes referred to as the MIT of the North. We are consistently ranked in the top 150, sometimes top 100 universities, depends on the year. And in the top 50 for disciplines like computer science, math, electrical engineering, and technology. And the reason that this is important is there are a lot of very, very strong connections between the history of the University of Waterloo and its growth and establishment, the establishment of its reputation. So next slide, please. So if you will indulge me, I will take you back in time. The University of Waterloo did not start with a strong reputation. It was established in 1957 with a highly criticized partnership between education and industry. So just to sort of help you understand the context, like many American states in our province in Ontario, we were experiencing a post-war manufacturing boom. And very specifically in our region, we had an acute shortage of engineers. There were no universities that granted degrees to engineers. And more importantly, the industry within the region was reporting that the graduates that they were getting didn't have the skills that they needed. So the founders of the University of Waterloo thought they needed to establish an institution that could help build up engineers and that they would do so directly in partnership with industry. So they had heard about Hermann Schneider's model. They adopted the American model of cooperative education with the idea that students would alternate between school and work throughout their degree. Back in 1957, there were 74 brave students, many of whom didn't even have their high school diplomas, that joined the first cohort at the University of Waterloo. The whole concept was seen as completely radical and highly criticized by peer institutions. They called it interrupted education. They said that the program would lead to the development of an inferior engineer and that industry wouldn't engage. Next slide, please. When we fast forward almost 7 years later, the University of Waterloo now runs the world's largest co-op program. Every year, we send over 25,000 students from 120 different academic disciplines to complete paid work terms with over 8,000 employers around the world. So at its core, those students alternate between 4 months of school and 4 months of work, such that by the time that they graduate, they have up to 2 years of paid work experience in up to 6 different organizations. Along the way, they build a very strong professional network, they have stellar resumes, and they create a remarkable ability to transfer their knowledge and their skills across very diverse contexts. The paid nature of the program also really helps to increase access to education. So on average, the students will earn between $6,500 and $25,000 US for 4 months of work. And again, they're alternating between school and work. To give you a sense to sort of situate it, our most expensive tuition at Waterloo is $14,000 US a year. So by participating in the co-op program, students can either completely or almost completely pay for their studies. But of course, it's not just access and experience, it really is those outcomes that matter. So those inferior graduates that our colleagues were worried about have one of the highest employment rates in the province. We have 96% of our graduates employed within 6 months in a job that is related to the skills they developed at Waterloo. They also see salary premiums that start from that first day of work and persist throughout their careers. And it's not just the students that see these kinds of economic outcomes. So numbers of impact studies have been done over the years. We just had one done this year by EY. They have calculated that for every dollar that an employer spends on salaries, they earn $2.20 in economic gain. We have surveyed our employers to better understand their experience. 93% of them report a positive return on investment, stating that they got more or much more from participating in the program than they themselves put in. Next slide, please. And the last piece that I just wanted to highlight in a Waterloo overview, because I think it's important to those of us that are thinking about building up our economies and economic development, we see a very strong connection between participation in the co-op program and entrepreneurship. So Waterloo is the #1 university in Canada for creating unicorns, and a number of research studies have shown that direct connection between what the students experience and learn in their work terms and the ventures they later create. So what we think is happening here is that the students are going out into a workplace and they experience a problem. They come back to class, they go to a different workplace, and they see a similar problem. And rather than having students creating ventures for problems that might not exist, the students are thinking about how they can resolve those real world problems that they've been exposed to as a part of their co-op program. To help support this, we've developed infrastructure on campus, incubators, accelerators. Students can do a co-op term to build their own enterprise to help them launch those ventures. And again, just very quickly, one of the research studies that was done by some of our colleagues looked at 55 of our graduates that had VC funding and patents and found a direct technological proximity between the patents the students developed and the places they had worked on their co-op work terms. So that is our rapid fire overview. I'm going to pass it back to Dave to talk about some of the benefits of work integrated learning that we see from participating in the program.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, it's a really good segue from some of the economic and entrepreneurial-based benefits to a broad overview of some of the highlights from the research, literature, and practice about what people, students, employers, and institutions get out of their participation in work-integrated learning. And I guess be forewarned, I'll try to really skim through this to make sure that there is time for questions at the end. What I'm doing really is summarizing a series of book chapters on this subject, so I don't imagine that we can really dive too deeply into it today, but if you do have questions, you've got our contact information. We'd be happy to share more. So really briefly, in a nutshell, some of the benefits for students regarding work integrated learning. Well, we know based on the research that WIL delivers a wide range of benefits for students. And in the interest of time, I just want to highlight 3 of those for you here. First, WIL strengthens discipline-related skills. Students gain hands-on experience in fields like engineering, healthcare, business, or the arts, helping them build technical competence and confidence. At the same time, WIL develops professional skills such as communication, teamwork, problem solving, adaptability, which are critical for workplace success. In fact, some research suggests that these are the things that help open doors towards industry. Second, WIL also supports career self-management. Students develop clearer career goals, learn how to navigate professional environments, and become more proactive in managing their own pathways. So there's sort of like a sense of agency. It really places students at the center of their own journey. And finally, all of this contributes to greater employability. Graduates with WIL experience are better prepared for the workforce, more competitive in hiring, and more likely to find roles aligned with their skills. Anne already mentioned some of that. There's a pretty robust evidence base supporting this claim at this point. Taken together, WIL doesn't just prepare students for work, it transforms how they learn, who they become, and how they transition into their careers. WIL also offers a range of tangible benefits for organizations. Again, very briefly, I just want to highlight a few of these for you here. First, benefits start with increased organizational capacity. Students can take on meaningful work, projects, day-to-day operations, daily analyses, things that might otherwise be delayed or sort of pushed off the side of a professional's desk, bringing energy and momentum while freeing up experienced staff to focus on higher level priorities. Second, supervising students supports staff development, giving employees the chance to build leadership and coaching skills. I have a really personal direct experience with this. I learned a lot about people management earlier in my career because I got the opportunity to supervise co-op students. And I often think about where would I be today if not given that first opportunity to work with these more junior staff. A lot of the people who find their way into people management roles may find themselves starting with supervising a work integrated learning student. And finally, Will strengthens connections with post-secondary institutions, opening the door for longer-term partnerships, things like research collaborations and ongoing access to emerging talent, or maybe even things like curriculum, co-design, and redevelopment. So there's definitely some benefits for employers to be involved in work integrated learning. Lastly, there's benefits for higher education institutions that offer opportunities for work integrated learning. Will tends to strengthen an institution's reputation for employability because when graduates consistently leave with real experience and relevant skills, it signals to students and employers and policymakers that the institution actually produces talent ready to contribute in the local workforce. Second, it enhances the student experience because when students clearly see how studies connect to real-world applications, their engagement tends to go up. Learning feels more relevant. It supports persistence, satisfaction, and academic success. Third, Will enables partnerships for innovation because working with employers and community organizations allows institutions to gain access to current industry challenges and opportunities. And this supports applied research, curriculum innovation, all the things that I mentioned earlier. Finally, and I think this aligns very well with your task force, Will tends to deepen community engagement. It connects institutions to regional priorities via the students who are sent off campus into the community. Economic development, social challenges, workplace gaps. Through placements, projects, institutions actually become active contributors to what's going on around them. So taken together, this is kind of the key message. Will really helps institutions move beyond just delivering education to actually playing a central role in the talent development and innovation and community impact that happens in their local context. So again, that's years and years and years of research boiled down into a 2 to 3 minute script. I absolutely know that that's too much to handle in this single presentation. If you're interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out. We've got a treasure trove of resources that we could share. But what we really want to talk about is the opportunities to build a Will ecosystem. So back to Anne to cover some of that.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. And maybe I'll have you just flip ahead to the next slide. So as Dave mentioned, I've spent a number of years studying work integrated learning ecosystems and working in countries around the world to help build up Will. And I truly believe, with as much Canadian humility as I can muster, that we have established one of, if not the strongest work integrated learning ecosystems in the world. And if you will indulge me in a very quick little history lesson, I would like to kind of go back a bit in time and highlight some of the key decisions that I think led to the development of that ecosystem, because I see a really similar opportunity for Louisiana in what you're attempting to do to build this up, considering all of the partners that help to make work integrated learning successful. So I won't spend too much time on this, but just bear with me. We're going to go back to the 1970s. The University of Waterloo has been operating for about 15 years, and there are about 15 other higher education institutions in Canada now offer the model of co-op. Throughout this time, these directors have stayed in touch with each other. They've learned from one another, and they've decided that they should establish a community of practice. So the National Association for Cooperative Education was created in 1973. It was called the Canadian Association for Cooperative Education. And it has been one of the most instrumental components in how we have advanced work integrated learning within our country. We've helped to build up capacity, but also to advocate to all of the relevant stakeholders, to government, to industry, and so on and so forth, by coming together and having a collective voice. And so I would really encourage you to think about how you build a community of practice in Louisiana as you start to build up this work. The second piece comes along just 6 years later, actually in direct response to some things that were happening in the United States. So If you are a history nerd like me, you may or may not know that in 1968, the College Work Study Program was established under the Higher Ed Act, and there was a whole flurry of activity in the United States to build co-op programs. And over time, through lobbying, the sort of requirements for what could be funded got degraded to the point that any program with any kind of employer engagement could be called a co-op program. And so the Canadian colleagues were watching what was happening very closely in the States, and they were also very much hoping to get federal funding. And so they said, well, if we're going to do this, we really think we've got something with this model, and we should probably set some standards so that if funding is made available, everyone has to kind of follow along these standards. So they went away for a weekend to Quebec and had some wine and some cheese, and they wrote up these accreditation standards. Dave and I, just 2 years ago, worked on a project to sort of revise them, but I will say that almost all of the core elements that were established in 1979 have held true today. And I'll just point out a couple of them and why I think they're really important. So the first one was that 30% of the degree needs to be spent in work, and that work period is 16 weeks or 4 months. This was critically important because it created interoperability. So employers could hire students from across the country with relatively similar timelines, relatively similar processes, and they could start to understand what this concept of co-op was. The second piece was the decision that students were going to be paid. Not all forms of will in Canada are paid, but co-op is. And coming to agreement on this means that we as higher education institutions are not competing with each other. We don't have one school that offers engineering students for free and another school that says, wait a minute, you have to pay them. This has made the concept of paying students in Canada quite common. The third piece that I think is perhaps the most critical, the most challenging for higher education institutions to implement, was the decision that co-op would operate year-round. So students needed to be available from January through to December in one way, shape, or another. This has been one of the most important elements of the ecosystem because employers operate year-round. And when we only have things like summer students, or we go to an employer and we say, will you take my student Tuesday to Thursday from 2 to 4 p.m., it's really hard for them to figure out how to make a system around that. But because co-op students are available year-round, our employers don't treat them like an interruption to their work. They treat them as part of their talent pipeline. The final piece to put around this is that creating a structure, whether or not it's the perfect structure, also allowed government to support and endorse and create funding programs. I'm going to give you a rapid fire overview of some of the funding mechanisms that we have in place in Canada. And the core point is that all of these funding programs link back to those accreditation criteria. I once had a policymaker say to me, I will fund co-op any day of the week because I know exactly what I'm getting. And that's your challenge. That's your work ahead with the other forms of work integrated learning. Really quickly, just to give you a bit of a state of the union for Canada and work integrated learning right now, within the last decade, we have seen a substantial increase in interest in work integrated learning from government, from industry, and then subsequently from higher education. In 2016, our government introduced a pilot project called the Student Work Placement Program. It was $76 million put aside to support wage subsidies for students in high demand work placements. And that same year, our Business and Higher Education Roundtable came together to prioritize making work integrated learning accessible to students across the country. CAFGE, that organization that was established back in 1973, expanded its mandate to support all forms of will and started to build out this ecosystem with industry, with other higher education partners, with students to advocate for the expansion of these programs. That student work placement program went from $76 million in 2016 to $623 million in 2019. And the government has subsequently supported a mandate that every Canadian student will have an opportunity for work integrated learning by the time they graduate. I'm just going to kind of skip ahead for the sake of time. So about a decade later, we've had 2.5 billion invested from the Canadian government. If we want to convert that, let's make it 2 million US since 2015. And the most significant change for me, having spent a lot of time doing advocacy to government reps, is that they all know what work integrated learning is, and they all believe in it. I sat in the Minister of Finance's office and had the policy advisor tell me, you don't need to convince me that WIL is a good idea. We know it's just good policy. And so even then, when we find ourselves in scarcity budgets and times of fiscal restraint, we are continuing to see investment in work integrated learning because of the outcomes for the learners and the outcomes for industry. Dave, let's skip ahead. I'll give a few examples of the kinds of subsidies. These ones are very co-op focused, but just to give you a sense of sort of like how it works across the system, the biggest one is the Student Work Placement Program. Again, we've had continued funding for a decade now. And it's essentially a federal wage subsidy that covers 50 to 70% of a student's salary if industry brings them in. And it's kind of only for net new, so for additional hires that they make. There's also a My Tax business strategy internship that is about research and innovation. So if you bring a student in for a research or innovation project, you can have half of their wages covered. And then at our provincial or state level, we also commonly have tax credits for industry. So in our province here in Ontario, an employer brings a student in, they get 30% of the salary back in a tax credit. And because they're at different government levels, they're all stackable. And trust me, we have employers who know how to get every dollar and will stack every possible thing that they can. Next slide, please. This is a very, very busy slide, and I will take just a minute to explain to you why there are so many icons staring at you. It is to show you the work integrated learning ecosystem that we have established in the past decade, primarily led through the National Association. So in 2016, when all of this interest started to bubble up about work integrated learning, we decided that we really needed to get together and to understand the interests of all of the different stakeholders in the ecosystem so that we could have a common voice for advocacy. So the National Association routinely brings together the federal associations for universities, colleges, polytechnics. CASA is the Federal Student Association, so the association that represents all of the individual university associations. We meet with the Business Higher Education Roundtable. We have become very good partners with our industry associations who give the wage subsidies through the Student Work Placement Program. And we regularly get together and work on policy documents, on submissions to the different government bodies that would eventually be establishing the federal budget. So we have worked very, very intentionally, having national conversations on work integrated learning, roundtables with these different organizations so that we know each other, we trust each other, and we're advocating collectively. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm going to move into some of the critical success factors. These are ones that I would say have held true over different contexts, cultures, economies, labor markets, education systems, you name it. So I've built WIL in countries from Senegal through to the UAE, and I can assure you that it works everywhere, but it doesn't work anywhere unless you start with your employer partners and you actually treat them as partners. So you actually understand what their needs are, their skill gaps are. You think differently about educational programming so that it meets their needs. I always recommend that you don't start to try and boil the ocean with a system-wide solution, but find those labor markets that are desperately looking for talent and have those industries that are desperately looking for talent and have those conversations with them about how your students might have the skills that they are looking for and what they would need from you in order to make that happen. The second piece, institutional support. Work integrated learning is not business as usual for higher ed. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we see is that institutions treat it as such. And this still happens even when we go in and say, make sure you're putting aside dedicated resources. Sometimes institutions try and do this by just adding more to the faculty. You will be able to do some work integrated learning, but you won't be able to achieve scale unless you think about resources. You think about buy-in from faculty. You have dedicated staffing. University of Waterloo, we have 250 people that support that co-op program. So that's the scale that we need to be working at. And of course, that means we need a model where we can fund it and resource it and have it grow. You need students who are prepared to contribute. They are partners in this. And so that means you need to make sure there's space in the curriculum to prepare the students for those WIL experiences, working closely with your partners to make sure that the experiences that you're giving to the students make sense for them and that the students have the skills that they need to successfully complete those experiences. Probably isn't a shock to you based on my earlier history lesson that I think standards are critical. And I think they're actually more important for the interoperability than for the standard itself. I don't know if 4 months is the right time for a work term, but I know that creating a system has helped us grow WIL and co-op in Canada in a way that we wouldn't be able to without that structure. And then last but certainly not least, in all of the contexts that I've worked in, it's very difficult to build work integrated learning if you don't have government as a partner, if they don't recognize the extra costs that it brings to institutions, if they aren't thinking about ways that they could give incentives or tax credits, and if there isn't money for that, they can at least be providing certain policy levers. So sometimes it's things like requirement and procurement contracts that students are brought in if they're getting a state contract or something like that. Okay, I'm almost at time, so I'm going to do rapid fire opportunities for Louisiana. Dave, let's go to the next slide. Dave started with a quote from our friends Sovila and Vardy. They wrote about the history of co-op in the state. I highly recommend that you read their work and learn about what has been successful and where some of the challenges are. I see such a beautiful opportunity for you ahead. I'm so excited that you are thinking about this at the state level, because doing so helps to facilitate all of these individual institutions that might be struggling to do it on their own. So my top 5 thoughts on your roadmap for success: start with your local context. Those priority sectors, the regional workforce gaps, as I said, to have those conversations, see where the need is, build out those pilot projects, create that proof of concept. Think about how you create a shared vision. I was just noting at your interim report that you've got, your work-based learning playbook. How can you use that to create a shared vision, to create that community of practice for your administrators, for your staff? It's often lonely work. And so to bring the group together and help to build that vision will actually go a long way towards helping you achieve your goals. The next 2, it's kind of a dice toss as to which one should be first: policy, funding, and incentives. Having conversations with government. What is possible? Are there resources that can be brought to bear to build out these programs, whether that's for industry, whether it is for the higher education institutions themselves? How do we move from pilot to scale? Institutional capacity, core element that is often overlooked, that again, I think is the most important element in getting to scale. It is professional work and it needs to be treated as such. So finding that funding model that grows as your enrollment goes, building that institutional capacity, building the expertise. And then I think you're already thinking about some of these things: quality data and your overall ecosystem. So what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and how are you measuring them? And how are you going to take the information that you get in your program evaluation and actually evolve your programming from there? I went on way too long. I think I'll pass it back to Dave. Are you going to do the wrap up?
Happy to. Yeah. I mean, I felt like I should have been taking notes. That was an absolute masterclass, and really appreciated you walking us through building an ecosystem. We've left just a few minutes. I know that you've got another speaker coming in shortly, so we can pause here. I'll just say thanks to the Board of Regents for having us. We hope that this has been helpful. You can always reach out to us after this presentation, but with whatever time's left, we're happy to address any questions.
or we facilitate questions from here. Bruce, you want to go?
Count. So one of my questions that I have for you guys from a student perspective, being a little student in the room, if we do integrate this into our curriculums and everything, does it add any time or length to programs?
Yes. Hello. How much? Was that the question?
Yeah, does it? And if so, how much time would it add for students to be still in school for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our program is 4 2/3 years. So almost all of our undergraduate degrees in Canada are 4 years. Ours has an additional 2 semesters so that the students are getting that 2 years of work experience. They come to us for that. They know that the deal is that they're getting a full academic program and then 2 years of work experience. I do know that there are many American universities that have a similar model that are looking at kind of cutting down the time from 5 years to 4. So Drexel, Cincinnati, those kinds of institutions.
Lon, I know people are shy. Yes.
What are the disciplines that most likely take advantage of this? But obviously engineering, but what else are we looking at?
Do you want to go ahead, Dave? Do you want me to jump in?
There's the Waterloo answer. There's the Canadian answer. Waterloo has its foundations in engineering, technology, computer science. So those are the disciplines that are probably a little bit overrepresented in the co-op model at our institution. Across Canada, you can basically see any academic discipline you can think of is connected into some form of work integrated learning in some way. And I think the message here is that not all one size is going to fit every sort of discipline. There's going to be certain disciplines like health and education that are more likely to rely on something like a practicum or an unpaid field placement. Other disciplines, business, technology, engineering, architecture, might be more open to that kind of structured co-op program that Anne's referring to. I think the important thing is to check in with stakeholders to see what model is going to fit their context.
And I guess I just might throw in a very quick plug because we tend to think engineering, IT, business. And when I do work around the world and they say, where should I start? I say start with engineering, IT, business because they're the easiest ones. But you can absolutely do work integrated learning for history. Does it shock you that I have degrees in history? I did a co-op program at Waterloo in history. So they exist around the world, and it has a lot to do with how you set up your operations as to how you're going to find those opportunities for students.
Are these all bachelor's degrees, or do you have different degree levels?
So we have 75% of our students in bachelor degrees do co-op. We are increasingly looking at master's level and even some PhD level programs. And I would say that's a trend across Canada as well. A lot of growth in thinking about how you do a 1-year professional master's program with work integrated learning in it.
What about the lower level degrees, shorter than 4 years?
So we don't have them, but Canada's college program has countless examples of 2-year programs where they have co-op embedded. One of the only changes we made to accreditation was to lower that 30% so that co-op programs in colleges could participate, and it's 25% for them. So there's lots and lots of examples of doing it well at the college level.
And what sort of, are those the same sort of fields, or are there any differences there?
Roughly the same field. Our college programs might be a little more applied. You'd be more likely to find skilled trades in colleges in Canada and diplomas instead of degrees, that sort of thing.
Can you say a little bit more about the employer engagement? So typical side of an employer, kind of the ratio between the size of the employer and the number of co-op students they might have, and just some of the experiences for the campuses and university teams as they are working with employers, what that capacity looks like.
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then I'll pass to Dave because we've just done some research on engagement with small businesses. We have the full gamut of employers from the Royal Bank of Canada is one of the largest employers. They hire 1,200 students a term. The head of the bank is also a Waterloo co-op student that worked at the bank and is the biggest supporter of co-op that you could imagine. So there's kind of the crown jewel story, through to small businesses that have no employees that actually only operate and grow with student talent. So we have the full spectrum, every single industry that you could imagine. We're doing a research project on the impact of AI on these experiences, and our database is 250,000 job descriptions and 1,200 industries, I think. Dave, is that right? It's
definitely 250,000 job descriptions since 2017. It's astronomical.
And so really, if you can name it, we've got a co-op student working there. And then your second part of your question was, what does the engagement look like? So we have staff that are employer experience managers, and their role is to develop new business, to support our employers. They're there if there are issues with the student during the work term. They talk to them about their talent strategies. How can they leverage student talent? We have a centralized system. So employers can post a job, and almost any student across campus can apply for it. So we're always kind of talking to them. Do you need a marketing student too? What about your front desk? What about your data analytics? All of those things to kind of bring in more students. Dave, I don't know if you want to add anything particular from the SME stuff that we did. Great prompt. We're just wrapping up a research project right now that explores the impact of co-op participation on specifically small and medium enterprises. And there's a few things that stand out. I guess the big takeaway is something like 8 out of 10 representatives that we surveyed said that their participation in co-op had a lasting impact on how they do human resources management. So it didn't just involve learning how to supervise a co-op student. Participation in co-op, taking on a co-op student fundamentally changed how they manage people at a strategic level. As an example, some of the reports suggest things like they, for the very first time, had to formalize their onboarding process because they'd never done that before. You bring in an 18 or a 19-year-old who starts to ask questions and says, my institution wants us to look a certain way. That organization is now prompted to write these things down and think through it for the very first time. It goes beyond onboarding to things like strategy and talent pipeline development. But what we're really seeing is that co-op is not just for multi-international, the biggest organizations you can think of. Even the very smallest organization of 10 people can benefit from participation in this kind of model.
I was just Googling your university because we're doing some work around untapped talent, justice impacted individuals. And I was curious and pleasingly surprised to see that you all have wheel programs for cultural facilities. How does that work? So because it asks like here, and then, the people may be hallucinating. They not be saying the right stuff. So I just want to get your input on whether or not you all are doing any of your work integrated learning for individuals that are behind the wall and those who have been recently released with a record.
Right. We do not. However, I have done work with institutions in South Africa that are dealing with this exact challenge, where they have scale of 350,000 learners across the country that they are trying to support, some of whom are incarcerated. And how do you give students real world examples and work and experience when they are behind bars? They have lots and lots of challenges that we can't imagine in terms of budgeting and funding and all of those things, but they do exist. They support those learners. It is usually project-based work integrated learning. So Dave mentioned it at the beginning, the chirps, where industry will come in and give a brief and the student would be able to access that online. They'd be working with real data, authentic outcomes, all of the key elements of work integrated learning, but they're able to do so while they are incarcerated.
So how do you do to pay?
Sorry, I missed the second half of that.
I was thinking through the pay piece, but since you are specifically, I'll Google it.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, in South Africa, these work integrated learning experiences often aren't paid. They have funding for students for transportation and meals and sometimes accommodation and things like that. But in that instance, it's a really great question. It usually just wouldn't be paid.
Do you have students pursuing academic areas that don't align with their co-op positions? And whatever you see from those, does that open the door for like liberal arts types of graduates? Or are you seeing maybe some major changes when that happens?
Yes, yes, and yes. So recall that they get 4 to 6 work terms. The professional programs, engineering, pharmacy, architecture, they need to take work terms related to their discipline, but every other student can apply for just about any job. And we see all sorts of outcomes from that. We see sometimes students shift programs, but actually more often than not, what we find is that they learn that the skills they have are highly transferable. That is what you hear. I know I can fit in anywhere. I know I have valuable skills. And that's, a quote from a student studying peace and conflict studies. So they see the transferability, and there was a study that was done by one of our colleagues. Co-op students change their disciplines less than non-co-op students. Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I was thinking that same study. It's a bit dated now. It's kind of before the age of Gen AI, and there's more tools for career exploration. But I think that is a bit of a testament that co-op students learn fundamentally how to take charge of their own journeys, and they kind of make the path for themselves. Regardless the name of their academic department, they are in charge of creating their own career, which is the narrative that I put a lot of faith in. I really love that story.
Well, thank you both so much.
Can I inform you?
Yes.
I appreciate it. Going off for Dr. Dawson's question, in order to align it with curriculum, would you have to cut down on anything? So would you, in order to fully integrate work-based learning into curriculums, would anything actually cut down in those other degree programs?
That's a really great question. So the way that we do it is that there are, in almost every program, there's a co-op option and a non-co-op option. The base degree program is the same. The co-op is above and beyond. They do their work terms, they do some professional development courses. So they get like a bonus on their degree. They get the same degree. One says co-op option. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
And when you did your comparison, you're finding that the ones who took the co-op option have better long-term outcomes than the ones who don't?
Yes, absolutely. From resilience to salary.
Thank you.
All right, but we really do have to wrap you up. I'm sorry we're at time. That was wonderfully informative. We are very grateful to you for spending some time with us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck, and we are here if you have any questions. So,
thanks again. We are now we are now transitioning into a discussion on the ideas and themes raised during the presentation, and talk about how they might inform our work here in Louisiana. And to help guide the conversation, we have Kevin Grubb, the Vice President for Work-Based Learning at Strada, that we are all very familiar with. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you to facilitate.
Thank you so much. I want to first apologize for a small scratch in my throat. I promise I'm fine, and I do way better than I sound. But if I cut out for a minute, I will get back to that syllable that you might have missed. So much shared in that presentation. And so I just thought maybe we'd have a little bit of time to discuss one particular part of what folks at the University of Waterloo talked about. And a lot of that aligns with much of the way Strada thinks about work-based learning. So these are things that we also wrestle with too. So in particular, what I thought might be helpful to spend a few minutes talking about It's the concept that they mentioned around standards and definitions. That seemed to be a pretty key linchpin to things being able to take off, to policymakers being being able to know what to fund. For employers, that interoperability thing that was mentioned, that seemed pretty critical. So there are many things we could talk about from that presentation, but I thought definitions and standards could be one to allow you all some time to just noodle on things there. We do not have a ton of time. So what I thought maybe I'd do is I have some questions up here on a slide for everyone that we take maybe 15 minutes for you to just huddle up in pairs or trios just around you wherever you are. And take a minute to look at any one of these questions you might want to talk about as a group. I'll let you decide what feels, most important or salient to you to take time to talk about, and then we'll take the last 5 minutes of time that we have here, and I'll just have 3 folks share some thoughts of what emerged from your conversation among your pair or trio, so we can start to hear what was discussed. What I'll ask you also to do, if you don't mind, is if there's anything that feels really important to highlight, there are some pads of paper or pencils around here. Please write those things down because we will want to collect that just to capture the great genius that's here as we start talking about this definition standards. Does that make sense to everybody before I let you loose on conversation? Okay, hear nothing about that. I will let you huddle up in groups of 2 or 3 wherever you are. Feel free to write down great things here, and I will then ask if I'll call time about 15 minutes for just a pull on some things that were discussed. Thank you all. Have that.
Don't Google you.
So I'm so sorry. There are some slides in the appendix because I referenced Colorado on here. I should have mentioned that. I apologize that I threw in. Colorado has a definition of work-based learning, and Jobs for the Future also has a definition of work-based learning. They have a framework for work-based learning. So feel free to reference those if you'd like to take a little bit about the display something. So we're going to generate an application. It's in here. Absolutely. The Canadian I have a accreditation of staff translation. I might have to really don't call my scenario. So yes, things the version in the person has it on them in the state in them what else got very flat. It is no basically or for it's you're doing it's just about to say and it's we have the making it sorry. It's got me. Why is he like these I will always hear they get land of the state like really is it? So that's all I created us here. It's they can rather get some adjusted and I didn't see much. I think this is kind of hard as like Donald said, it must like production. I guess Don, that's that's out of his lot. We haven't sort of all been through quite soon. How that chaos. Because some green will become when I see anything else sex just like so we know like the standard lawyer and culty body else says up. They will then go out. Sort of like lots of bigger. Yeah, like he's right. He's like that kind of bad. So it's sweat. Actually, here for bad. Yes, you're out and then you understand it's scary. Like that's like a lot. You know, it's time. Like I say, and after he's and it's like that. It's not that, but I see done following the friends. But it was nice. And you spread it starts with the sun behind and the works. I mean, it was so high. But so do you know that are that downside? Never and see I speak at house for banks like that. So actually, you're different. Because I think the month and it's right. It's not 15 years to have one parties. It's like you're and you're inside side. You are going to find differences. I can't smith this. There are sets depending how good that. Like my best like then brilliant. I see how a bag for 87 and that ends. Then some that. Like I think it's feeling. I should never sort of fast. You know, repeats of how it is finished. Right. I like be something up here beside that.
Yeah, it's like
Start out.
hang up and people to
Less
be at least forward to the document. Ash 2000 weeks of foods. Playing up 39 times to say is yours. They asked now to be great. So all this it's a plan to get and now again. Fire has layered and definitely. That's why I'm glad he's probably been it as a and that push war. I didn't raise it, but just we put in mind and I was surprised when I had to do it in such a way like that. So at least this thing they would be and we made a fairly inside based on this until we got the bird hairs. I would say Jesus told him that still like this what happens. And I was some little thing and back to Saints. Going to take the why real this story is not to find foliage can also
as they speak his name. Nations, a very different countries who are trying the school was in other nations that he sat down like I don't have to but things would need to very why sounds you're not having any they hold them. And she was that is quite so state. I go through the years 7 days. It didn't be kind of personal 18 months. But then he said, no, I think that we actually I have to say I'm not out of advice when same stuff as the some get started and why not maybe pretty but I don't get that started because I studied here. So like you just it's like I started after I'm absolutely flat. It's pretty also study because there's a piece of yes, yes, we don't need all I'm definitely siblings. I don't think you for that. We've been that I mean, yeah. So you say she's like, yeah, obviously a thought straight, but it's just what's up there. You can't be your credit dates being your best. There's a little bit, yeah, there's a little bit in costs and this lines of solid, yeah, rebellion, as yes, but that's the stuff, a little bit like it's a set loud. That's not there's been $5 because I because there's $7 Albert, that's on this around, yeah. So guys reported me already. It's not guys that I last play on it. I say something. Let's start on the hours. Check that. Oh, really? Has that last by something here? Exactly. I say also some like because I'm sure Strada and Strada was fun book they are. The Sabbath engaged and science and audio by my yeah, I was thinking. He's half like I've had the design. That's it because they get sad and then that I would I like I think them never see myself on each other as past is sort of stated thing they got now you got well that message that is now the big they were past them care well I see like offense first music was set at the had trees not well so this did really trouble my to says that's gonna be some side it's hilarious part it's like one thing if you say you are stands on she and you're like probably just so and so and should some of these lower the actually she side with it yeah that's so many so no again so it's like something yeah I think digital levels start little Jimmy train ideas but in some powers where it is for some sort of your favorite yes yeah he's something like me I think when the value is right or in sneeze it's a lot there but right family and the white is and the good is like all yeah I don't utilize ways that yeah like go ahead on in fact it's still like the no, that's the reason I'm on fan of people also get it. Yeah, like do you think we're on the I'm like layoffs with those sauce. You're forgetting to have that. So I'm now still that's not but yeah, so I like they don't get out this like then yeah and actually like that my last is not butters selling throwing us space. That kind of serious guy. I just big tiny fact this is stopping somebody is of something that and so then we sir that's sense where yeah next called it them jokes to live on right well it's set on that I'm not ill I think that's try that think that so said it don't work out that I husband they have to make those trips to the ashes all things come to so on next ready I right to reach it's all I don't have the other door attack them actually one last thing on that I think the side for a very stud was and I have I don't use it that I know how to my friends when I use the that was that it's I think like said oh the subject
so like conversation like I see I like that no you just fun had at least they don't start season and that's could be better then it's not option so but yeah, you see it's like a lot my emails or something you're flat the house when it's down right now the sun that I see I think it's not to be like their next bro so we can start finishing out bringing something else so next shots 40 minutes of technology is really I'm done with it. I'm going to take this not in a list, you know, yes, destroying themselves. So they can try that. Shadows and limiting speaks. Yeah, just like say somebody attempts. But it's a great thing not to do. The aspects are very there's lots of ways for people to have and some need to later. Like it's buildings. Yeah, I similar to other series. Shout to some boys like that, but that was well, it's a matter of there's perhaps most of the that's the regular. Yes, the worst today, don't have to video that as per what is 30 sir, and it's that and every golden is live to show you read it. How we think really I did one day kids. But you're up to them that I have said, you know, you're sort of not saying it like it's upside you can't and then it's not big sad.
think there's the helps to all use all like so I still so and I do pass series for I return I merge they start as please yeah excel yes and so talk at some stand now that say so if I'm sure I mix of some sense it is all but it needs to be section every that yeah I mean blood so fabulous but it's just so agenda just reads all this is actually yes fine I don't agree with that satisfied by that I'm testing about 5 minutes left. And if you want to switch questions, now might be a good time to be have it. 5 minutes. What do you know? That's just like after the words. That's what's not. I agree. It's about just I get to obsess it goes and fresh and nothing else new told. So we're going to sit ship. Yeah, but I guess that yeah, actually not. But when it's not as serious knowledge, people not have the same she wants or excellence. But yeah, yeah, we constantly feeling there's all separate lots times are people have the dear set up. So it's my I like certain thing that the others have the art to and not have fear. It's funny. Yeah. And not things for experience. So it's just still my certain night is about all the artists and so on something and it's stuck in that yes my films and it's not when Sunday of that there's the down of those everyone's back but out the weeks. But they're moving the stars and list that deals so much. What a just in sub seems on to 7 hours. Yes, one guy to do this, you have to say, oh, there's guys, so you say that something else, hours type and each other. Then out here, there's an all of those 2 fine little tonight, West Sweden, should make the hand. Now, I should see that it just hurt at the community. It's an awful bit of other types and apparatus. And say, yeah, I think what I think of the I thought I was normally for life, and I was going to sorry to come people here, I'm restoring ass. Yes, he doesn't want to, it's so really nice of saying, and it's a second this second beat off. Here right now, he's the best with the serious literature. That is a place, President. And that's the one who's those realities, it's right, so just for that, you that already, and then that's and we got those lows, but yeah. I finds out we find a way and so choose the lawyer and then you're going to send I do that Chris and let I'm here I slay out you like it's like this. Oh yeah, that's it. I just so I to do the that's about that. It's just she's like boundaries is like you could say that thanks that's like in scratch that space I saw he just start in so we're there I think just try to set them coming in whatever you there's a big state I mean that's seriously there but the trust I'm finding out no doubt at all. And she knows the way, yeah, followed me at grade. Because, yeah, that was very long to the board of range. On it, and it's surprised. I was on 3 times going to say, the thing that drives each artist says is, it's okay, it's an house of done that. But I send you those things, and this up, and they it's the spring of Louisiana. I see she girls. Like, I think it's like a minute. I know. It's a bit of house that I did a thing happen. So, he's there. Because they have seen what it is starting to study, they chanted its session. Actually, on the road. Yeah, there you should say I don't like suppressed your grades. So, we're going to go with so like when I was there, probably not based like that's good for you. It's also very healing. I'm going to be able to get my arguments going. The place where I didn't just look at there. A lot of incentives, but I'm sure it doesn't really know actually not I think they have time there. So my and yeah, whatever I very lot. And I was yeah, I'm really bad is I think for now those things I was studying that. I looked at this amount and I never saw it here. So everything else like I knew it was the mess of which they come out nice so you should treating speaker helps that's the seventh it's not I'd be so shared it's similar eyes it's so much like says it's harmonized. Yeah, that's easy. It's right though about I want to see how it's well they don't have the days on it. Yeah, so my least waiting inside was some praise. It's just like I stayed there on the machine with I most reason. That is why it was one friend saying we're really just waiting about him and what it was also much there. You hope was jet here in my station I have a climate staff and then be found down on a building. It's like expected like oil shop property. So yeah, I've been out higher is how I should do I had been say I yeah, well see my next flat I think fancy so it's like being on this but we I can get our side of the right this and I found it like but I see it was simple out it's fast salary as free it's not a little bit out than that the late yeah that's yes and they say stickly a little bit how many look at the drawing I'm out this is that over out let's side is this right I'm down with veterans to get ready to from that I saw that's yeah there's fire shirts on she did on
and it's president, some party, slide, it was sensitive, but very fun man. I said, I started up with it, you can start with your cities, it's hot, but yes, you got pretty, and then how it's on, what's in, and shit, I just got in sliders. Next, I was like, I accept that. It's like, there, I'm not previously, I said, yeah. So you two when I found no bitch and I think yeah they cut the videos and said it's more than I say usually sad but is a video she said I'm thinking about big really long and but keep that I was just so here so they really have a little bit it's so I was telling you and the center ABCD so yeah I was trying to start using house the training to let's get it up it build some specific states because last play on very simple being understood when you're dancing you're on the glad any shot and there was so it's not a fun my city was strong to be like but it is so and like so built I think it's serious and yeah I see that by somebody I just see I think if I like to a pretty basic source I try to that's side and it's a nation it's side tiny better which is an accent happy to that side to sash book not necessarily this guy did fast and then where it is supposed wait you know test that thing without this yeah I get to the this one and then these I would say out of the most next thing taking some credit like in our slide it's pretty demonstrated come that we all together this as I'm out of 5 years sad and be like Phoenix Sparks. All right, if I could ask you all to return to your seats, step in or that. I will bring us back to one conversation here and let you there to be on the as a capital E extrovert, I hate interrupting conversations, but I'm going to have to do it for the purpose of time. So if I could bring us back to one conversation, that'd be great. Thank you all so much. I mean, I had a concern. I saw a lot of writing. I heard a lot of chuckles. I saw a lot of serious faces. So that tells me there was some good conversation that happened among you all. And I just want to, again, for the purpose of time, maybe just limit us to if the three groups or people could give us some hints about what you discussed that use these questions as just a prompt for discussion. You could talk about many other things related to definitions. I'd love to just hear some of that among you all. And again, we'll take all your notes if you want to write those. Melinda's graciously offered to collect them at the end of the meeting. We'll have another time to discuss after the next presentation too. So more time, but 3 people. I could just hear from 3 folks about. And I move over. Oh, wow, yes, and be wonderful. I don't want to take the stuff and throw it back. Why go?
All right. So we started with the first question first. What should the definition include? It should include things learned from the classroom and how they were applied. The development of soft skills for all professions. What are the skills that translate not just to one profession, but to all professions? It should definitely have a co-curricular component within all of these, as well as understanding that they go from light touch to an immersion experience. At the end, there should be some sort of a capstone report or an application at the end of term. It's not just, okay, today's your last day, let's have cake and move on. And then a student should then share back to the class, how do you apply this knowledge? What was learned and how can it be applied? And also share with others, this information to, 1, cement that knowledge within the student themselves, but 2, how did you apply it? And why should others go after those opportunities in the future? All of those things are critical. The second question, we share definitions, basically creates a singular shared vocabulary. It needs to be a shared vocabulary by business, by industry, and by academics and governments, where we're all talking from the same thing and not 35 institutions speaking in a different language. And then last, who should create this shared vocabulary? Well, we're looking at the top of each group. So the Board of Regents, obviously the tops for education. Lobby, Louisiana Business and Industry would be top for business and industry. But then the component of what about governmental? Should we bring in the fence? Does it slow it down? Things like that. But at the very least, we need to have a shared vocabulary.
And we said Louisiana works that government basically pulled on the bed. The word that we used in that second one was calibrate, which means how do we close the communication gaps? And so when people in Louisiana, regardless of where you are, hear work-based learning, they know what it is. And it's similar to what we have had to do with what is our educational attainment goal for Louisiana. And it doesn't matter who you walk up to and ask that question to, they're going to say it's 60 by 30. And it's not the Regents' goal it's the state of Louisiana's education attainment goal, and we want to make sure that it communicates and translates that to shared ownership. Shared ownership, something that's very clear. Right. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. Another person. Yes, you have to share all your answers. I love that. I heard all the answers, but whenever you feel like you want to share, speak.
So I'm just going to share kind of our answer to the first question and the last question. I think what you said around the second question, it's universal. The thing that we talked about is we really like the way that Colorado has the continuum, and we kind of like the word use continuum instead of definition, because definition says finite and continuum is definitely a swim. And so the other thing that really made an impression on us was education coordinated, learner initiated, and employer and business led. There we go. That made a huge impression on us. The thing that I would like, and I'm sure this deeper beyond this framework, is the role of the other if they're not leading. So education is leading. What role do employers have to play in that section? Vice versa for the other two sections as well. Things like that.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Katie for figuring out how to read this thing on the back with a
Very small,
yeah. Sorry, so if you took a picture of it, we still they would just like digress, skip. And the other part, and this was just more of spinning off. It doesn't really answer the main question, but it would be really neat to know more about co-ops here in Louisiana, because I know they exist, but they're like some sort of like it's a weird stepchild you put up in the attic, and I've never interacted a lot. Other students that went through that program, not while I was at LSU, not while I audited LSU, not any of that.
Yeah, we had the boss cells.
Yeah, I know you do.
Yeah,
but I don't know where you hide them at, because I just yeah. So I just and so it would be to see just how some of that actually interacts, so we would know. So we get into the policy realm, like maybe what do you do with pops, like when they take off. Hey, I'm sure there's some rule somewhere that allows you to make it work, but I hope it's
some more visibility into specific models.
Yeah, and specifically maybe having some of those people actually come and
there's that here. Wonderful. In the interest of time, I'm going to close this out, so I want to keep us to task. It's 2:26, so I'm already 1 minute.
I just add one thing.
One thing that Adam brought up is the need to include our hate salt partners from the victim's definition so we can be aligned.
That's the whole thing. Yes. Thank you. Thank you all very much, and I will pass it over.
Thank you, Kevin. Recently, Leaders for a Better Louisiana distributed a survey to employers to better understand their perceptions of and experiences with work-based learning, and to provide a high-level overview of the preliminary findings and key themes emerging from the responses. I will now turn it over to Trista.
Thank you. These are very preliminary results. We look forward to more employers sharing their goals with us throughout the summer, but certainly these are the first 26, and they already paint, I think, a pretty important picture. So I'm just going to go through the numbers quickly, and then we'll see what we got. So first of all, you can see that we, just as we heard from Alan Day, we heard from people from business of all sides. So 1 to 9, 10 to 50, 51 to 250, and 251 and above. So pretty even spread across different organizations. And then we asked, how do you currently think of yourself as a business when it comes to perhaps the health of your business? This should be to make you feel happy inside, and Andrew as well. Then
yes.
Then half of them say they're stable, and half of them say they're growing, and none of them say they're shrinking. So that's very good, right? So we did allow them to select more than thing. I don't think anybody selected both stable and unstable, so it's good. But we also asked them, so do you need additional resources to recruit entry-level workers and senior-level workers? And again, you can see a healthy proportion of them do. So that's an encouraging slide to see. All right, so now on to work-based learning. We say, do you offer work-based learning in some form or fashion? So paid, unpaid, co-op, internship, project-based, preceptorship, clinical placement, all of the different kinds of things. We asked it, and you'll see in just a second, we asked it in a collegiate setting, we asked it in a K-12 setting. This is in the collegiate setting now, and you can see that about 70% say that they do offer some form of work-based learning, about 30% say they don't. And then we said, well, what kind of things do you offer? And so you can see this, that again, the most popular thing to offer is a paid internship. Right now, then, around 70% of those people who, 70% of the 70% are saying they offer a paid internship, about 30% unpaid, but they offer all kinds of other things too. So co-ops, apprenticeships, service learning, all kinds of things. Again, about 30% said they don't do anything.
Do we think that maybe the responses were biased towards people who were offering something?
I don't know. So you'll see in just a second when we get to K-12 that we get a very different picture, but it's the same people who are answering.
Yeah, it just seems like that's
There's part of me that thought, okay, look, it's just all the people who are already doing it and are telling us what they're doing.
Well, it's totally what I'm asking. Yes.
It seems as though there's something more. We did ask them, so this is the 30% of people who said they don't do it right now. We said, so how come you don't do it right now?
They don't know how to.
They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to get started. And some of them say we don't have a budget. Some of them say they're focusing on other things. But overwhelmingly, they say we're not doing it right now because either we don't have the capacity or we don't know how to get started. So that's a pretty... If that trend continues, which we suspect probably will, that I think tells us immediately something that we should be getting ourselves to do. And of course, it's one of the deliverables that we're already working on. So not about, but at least validating. And then perceptions about how it is that they think of these people after their experience with your organization. Do you think that the experience that they had with you breakdown, we think, overwhelmingly they say they always strongly agree or agree. But about 30% say neither of the above, but overwhelmingly they think that they do in fact. All right, so now on to K-12. So you remember this one? So 70% said they offered to collegiate students, 30% said they don't. Same people, 80% said they don't offer currently any kind of a work-based experience to students in K-12. It's complete mirage. Again, some of it is because they don't know how to get it started. But not insignificant proportions say they don't see any value in it. And not insignificant proportions say that they have concerns about liability, risk, or letting school agents or apprentices and some layering. And then we were surprised to see not being at all in Michigan. We did ask that question where we can put together a word flag and we still don't get anything. Oh, yes. Yeah, like say, literally, this is all off the press, like the story. So the kind of question I want to know is the earlier connection between some of these answers, or they're in between the industries, all of the things. So
and the geography.
We do know the geography, and it was all over.
Okay.
So that was actually very informative. Yeah. All right, and then they basically asked, "Are you aware that Louisiana offers tax credit?" And largely they are not. But we have been understand So again, I think a good opportunity for us to they are now because we just told them. So and there's putting some important areas that it is 26 already. Pretty more. All right, so handing over to Kevin, let's talk about that.
Well, I actually wanted to mention it real quick. Strada just completed a survey nationally of employers about a range of topics. We published some of that data that was particularly around the impacts of AI on the field of hiring. We're not going to talk about it at length, but I highly recommend you read it. Within that survey, we also asked employers about their offerings of work-based learning, and actually 80% of employers said they offer some form of work-based learning. from our sample. So your 70% is actually not that far off from what we found in a recent survey nationally of organizations and a range types of work-based learning, but we run that spectrum. So not dissimilar from us. And I would say in my first read of the results recently of this survey, a lot of what you're finding here so far does seem to mimic what the national trends are that we're seeing in employers and offering work-based learning. So while it is very early and hopefully we'll have many more people respond, this looks to be on par with other data that we're seeing. And Jill, Louisiana, and we did one. It's possible. And I don't know the full breakdown by state of responsive. It is a much smaller survey than our State Opportunity Index. You're all familiar with that tool that has many tens of thousands of students responding. This is a much smaller sample than that. So really, I would say it's probably just representative of national influence in specific state.
Has anybody, I apologize for this, and maybe I'm just super cynical, but I absolutely cannot believe that 70% of employers are offering some sort of internship. Like there's got to be some.
I
think that's probably true.
I am not underrating the I don't think so either.
Yeah, I think 26 is.
Yeah.
Which is still say, I would say like this is also maybe y'all able to turn around some data, but just to highlight this, I would push the ask out to collectively everybody in this room. You all have employers in your networks. The link is available to share. Please do distribute.
Yes.
We have sent out to the economic developers, to the chambers, and Nicola B is going to share it. So more should be coming in, but redistributing it out to a broad base of audiences is a huge opportunity. Tedder, y'all have a huge list of employers too. I don't know if y'all could do it, but it'd be great.
We have
y'all have
every employer.
Their tax, they're fine.
It says that on periodic. I mean, there probably isn't any reason because it's something you should look at this. Yeah.
But you have the questions so that you want more.
Yeah, that would go under.
In September, we're all going to have a presentation and we'll kind of give us the data from the other side as well, so more to collect we have. And the least the initial data that we have from them suggests that 70% of the employers are done Louisiana offering information needs.
Did you have a question on the survey that if they were interested in learning more, that they could check the box, somebody would reach out to them?
So we're going to reach out to them no matter whether they check it again. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for that. That was great. So I have a few more discussion questions for you all based on, again, and then my initial read of the survey. So you could just hit the next slide. That'd be great. Essentially, what was interesting in that is there are, as Tristan highlighted, and if you nodded your heads at, there were some interesting responses in there from employers that suggest that they don't know how to get started. That capacity is a concern for them. So there's things that can be done to ameliorate those issues for sure, to support employers. So I have a couple questions related to that I'd love to hear you all talk about together again, and then we'll come back as a larger group. I'm going to not forget that I did put 7 in the appendix. Again, it is still a little small. I apologize. But things that you could reference or think about later, or we could talk about today. Strada, the work-based learning team, actually put out a resource on employer intermediaries and how they are effective in their service to employers to help stand up work-based learning. So that may be a way, a resource to be thinking about as you consider who and how to coordinate all the possible players that could support employers in standing up work-based learning, because there are likely many that could. And then there's another that capture a screenshot there of an initiative going on in Virginia right now. It was recently launched by the state called Internships VA. It is very specific to internships, of course, as the name would suggest. But as a state, they are standing up a lot of resources on how employers can offer internships. There's some financial incentives in the mix. They have a toolkit for employers that actually some of our team at Strada helped develop that has internship job descriptions, things to consider about how to recruit students for internships. So lots of practical tools for employers to think about how to stand up specifically internships. So there are lots of ways to think about how to do this, and it might be a good idea to have this full group of wonderful folks think about what will be the way that we actually start to organize ourselves around supporting employers. So we have a lot more time this time. So what I'll maybe say is for the next 15 minutes, you want to pick any one of these questions or something else if your group is like, oh, we have a whole other topic we want to talk about. That's fine with me to discuss and think about, take notes on. I'll let you know when that 15 minutes is up, and I'll just give you the high sign to say, if you want to talk about another question on this list, this might be a time. And then we'll come back again and just take some of the feedback from folks as you've all discussed, so we can start to hear what reactions we have to supporting employers in setting up park-based swapping. That sound good? Great. So feel free to have with new groups or the same group you had if you were happy with that. I'll give you the permission to move around here if you want, and I'll be calling time just as we're moving through discussion. Do you have a question? Yes?
When you say staff capacity,
Yes.
like staff,
What is so?
business staff?
Yes. So that's in response to the survey question about saying basically we don't have capacity to offer work-based learning. They're saying their current staff don't have capacity to do it, which I don't know exactly what that means, but from them. Yeah. Well, I would interject and say that I think maybe what they might be considering there, these are consistent with national data and surveys that Strada is aware of or has done. Things like we don't have the time for a manager to manage an intern, right? Or a co-op or a finance, right? That's bonus. We don't have the time to create or scope the proper projects for what an intern or an apprentice or a co-op could do. So the time to actually think about what is the program, what is the offering, how do we continue managing that person when we bring them on board? So the capacity there is a little bit more about the time capacity, right? The space to be able to actually post that and do that effectively. Does that help a little bit? Yeah. So that's a good question. So think about it.
Digging in a little deeper would make it easier to understand.
Digging in a little deeper on that now.
Like when you say staff, if you answered that staff,
Oh, yes. Yes.
with a follow-up question,
Yes.
as to choices, right?
What does that mean to you?
Yes, right. Writing these three options or something.
Absolutely. A good note for whatever might come next with this survey. Any other questions before I let you loose? That's a great question. Thank you. All right. Feel free to chat again.
I was looking here at simple or what I rather
Yes.
so basically every time that's like the preview how to do it talents with that helps. Yeah, right. And then besides they're looking at cost that. Just then we said my son really didn't lost Sasha and that is kind of like an employer base. Yeah, you really are I'm like sharing something tell me so yeah and that's great. So next guest is here out for his thought.
You know, ladies, you have
Register.
I said I know.
And about that somebody I'm going to help. It'll probably see other complex like as a like
the
special woman stats. Anybody you can but I still not players. Fine, big fast. Even at person.
No, sounds good.
Yes, tiny.
No.
Sorry,
It's great.
I guess so. There's no parameter. It's like I want to critique.
I totally.
The back bend. He's got
Like and
all pairs. But you can say I'm studying this already. But I have had some every so you have to be smile on say that it's kind of make up outside the kitchen car. I think that has no sad or just like for experiments that's a sound of activities or nice or even yes, they're all having so exciting to have to be that all by our side so makes these wrestlers so these inside the guy says handle in the owner event those that are not but I think I mean like I all here but not yeah I'm just but there's also a nice valley track on that. It's sometimes there must thing that has to do with things that we still want to use work you can imagine that side of things well so yeah so you have to have that still in that sound here to my head so I mean very such things I think probably now see all you know you asked why such the when I'm the young I see it right almost like questions and to see about it seven reasons how so you know back then it sounds quite stuff I actually not really that side yeah, I could grab something like a pretty just I know the desire to have very that's what I really system there. Because I was really asked but I really I'm sorry I'm not telling you she I'm not even done so I can straight out and see I understand my money's on yeah and I keep it but it wasn't that my skits laugh on and I tried to sit him down and think about this tomorrow we have this he's been doing the page on which was not because it's we all in the right first like once months better to be not having I don't take nurse. So it starts ready yet. I like that out so I don't put then first time and probably get hobby. So we're in the last size but I'm going to your 5 years there. I want to feel with benefit. Yeah, it's such a good like that helps all the quality. Little I see that clients on your best was high for system of breakfast templates. So I do obviously 10 steps that yeah, nice. So I sort of managed to then it's unnecessary. The bottom of the even once does I have flat realize that's what happens when they get right when I feel that the brown had up. We have those the jatters some to them as very much to us. I have to do was such a comment and the I'm not really so I know now. Most one hand. The thing's probably good for this bait on your right is most for the other side, but you know, half your side of that is it's really and just some of the job with her starting so feels like invest. That we use name so and we was there I'm like animal with such island to us but that was savvy it's for my animals here. I don't when they get value and so family and thing that does the some of the issues like stuff. Restaurants, they said, how did that maybe step? I guess things for us. Yes, since the America, that's my job show for them. Actually, I was lost in a circuit, and I don't get another. I'm not scared of any kinds of Spanish, and they've heard my hot, but it's hard to get their mind out. They work in less time. I don't know, I'm chair. So I learned so, and now you have about you heard the concept, right? So we put that out. I think I put out a yeah, last century press on lost spread on what I'm saying, and that's spread. So it's something like that, and that's. It's kind of message you have very easy and not hard, you know, the children each have this time to have like you want that it's nobody's set points and I you know I'm having this like you have and well the gosh I was I think chip for you how to fast it's not to let each have a center is in our stuff for these guys so like on the sites of that he's still here and how should make your last thought oh this one well I so bad you probably right side somebody else on it. So not set it off as a little more second if I yes I it's out as the already now I study you know yeah if I use all your Philippines so yeah the sorry I'm the facility I didn't know outside of my head I thought I speak mixed products that I'm so good if I and so there's possibilities that the lockdown is your result I think we have nights to jump in the first time and it's good now so kind of this side shows how to get out I started to go you know yeah I'm not hard yeah there's not that working. Oh, it's not I say cancel that and do that. So now then this dishes and all this. That's what her enforce. I know and if I have been in that yes we're not at it there's stuff and then I have to go like my he's not I got it you know and like in my coffee is that it's cute see oh it's alarming there's only it to look back. It's me on this. Yeah, but he just honestly parents. That's then we were having a game solid did they where's I'm beat I give I have a body so I can see the houses. Anyway. He saw it even after he stopped at it. Inside of stuff behind like that. It's given sense of more fan that himself. It's not I'm gonna say so I guess those so like a bloody soil out. So much see really good and shit. Yeah, so like how point and best up ready to find out so yeah, and it's a story to read that and oh okay. That's it I play well I had some guys out that I mean was that not to that other song so I wanted those that's the going things large songs we also got to shoot and stop it. So okay, I knew the right. I pinched that and praised the reality for this last. I didn't make it scary for the guy. So it's not now. Sorry, let's say in our catch up. We're going to go right. So I was help you to walk. You so glad but still but I don't. So I'm yeah, no, it's so it's sort of but we're good with now. How they have size camera so yeah, they have to shoot now. Then they find them I sat in your host house so they're telling you so they great as well and I said that I can mark back to you but anyway I'm basically very in this like subject sometimes yeah but based on ideas or anything that I don't get you know like small things about anything as and with that was this thought like something as a journey it had so they had to us and I have some so to bar things out speaking ready to talk about that's and everyone study some cat out here is brilliant I put that on set there's that one but that's the other one so they call and see yes it's it does make me also here for that you may say I'm not then yeah no it's really up to him and then I was here that's the guy if the word you said to that about months of your area hunts. Right, that is very video, which is something different. That is spending for less. They were able to go to the Sunday, so you're a pick marathon and react to bumps there. So your man, that's what I would say to the rest. New millions to share. It was this very instance. Next to everybody, like, you know, I don't know it. So it's all the ones Santa for kids large factors, and you'd have house, they weren't rocking, you know, running off. And I have to say, it's not the very empty, you know, isolation with the less. But you're out, it's still, it's not really as I use everything with a single I should do it. But you can be able to try this, you know, less than a year after this video is no last time. So, you guys get Facebook, I was like, sorry, and this will see it for that against her. There's nothing hard, stir, die, what you miss. I was from the thought actually because very happens to bring out is anger of death. Your work as to what I did is what. Maybe that's actually that's a thousand hours that I staying off and that was even up the article. I just worried about something like that. I don't know if somebody's a leader how to get more at this. Yeah, there's something I'll do because that's something I'm there, right? It's time to all these wants to do says, hey, got a fear. It's the highway go out. It was like airplane, you know, it sucks. Has to figure and must chat so that it was still next figure. So let you know, you did straight as how I did it. So that's you know, double for odds, like they still like that. Yeah, so and it's saying the same order. Hey, I'm focused on the over the time. Had hours to rise. I'm not here. That's how they fair, but it's kind of right. That's kind of things. I'm so always out. Hey, I'm a friend. Who's that? He's not in this group. But guys, she's reacting to our values. That next favors.
Yeah.
Yes. Operating. That just like that's great. You just don't really facts up to the target where I mean it's hardly not that against that. It's certainly not sharing the amounts of other money what section would play. They are something you snap on something to be jam. Then and this. So that and so I just that a bunch of my strawberries about everything that I mean lots of things was it was it's gone out. They start to come out from yeah, you shot. Was right on the years there and those headlines are so sad. Praise house, what's that? So we have my side, we got how it's that. She's a lawyer of class, and I the sense of my personality has been better. Just to have us face if we even kind of so you think it's as I see on students very experience, and that's something I still have the efforts, and it's WGBR. So that way, personality, I'm even considering about yeah, how did I see that's a great thing. Yeah, so when it's that's. Other desires, so red. Yeah, I can share that. It's from them now. They girls signing our goods. I just share the size to great to the lives. And if you come to him up, so it's a new to guys or just send in like all right. So yeah, these are just what's feedbacks. No, yeah, no, it's it's like a modern now. So I know it's I just thought sounds each other. Who having much say so or crossing like that's the show was it's on aspects. That's right now. I'm really something I just don't even matter on children. What you want to write, make sense, but the next time, like, you know, kind of see essentially that, this is that, and I'm ready, I've played so many that I security, sometimes I have to find the I see exactly right. I got out of started, so it's based off me, so sad as all, it's like, no, it's that, I guess as I so it's kind of I don't even there. So I so sad, and a big enough steel, and tell us that blood, so figure out when that, okay, I had each so in the day, you should now start to everyone telling that sponsored so much. What in that so to us, the big last year, I'm Sunday night is fine. I think it's at least just the good months. Every show see that we must get on the podcast. Yeah, and that makes little dome house. Yes, I mean, just things like I literally early for me. Yeah, for an so I choose. Yeah, makes my please believe I was free, rising. Great that I was see if I'm seeing that. I was there, see there's that months. Always see and spelled pretty good. Somebody should see you. Not very then so that you're gonna I don't know anyway. There was this I don't want to be so well at then I know it's best school idea where it's non ends and that's it. I go this season. But just was find it actually clip yes so if that's the beliefs I get the message I'm really having fun so see then that's that so actually they never fans. She went into that I think once this casual it's and not guys yeah that's so this big is size going to shut off out. I like saying stage no hey, so it's like I just no it's saying I'm to pass you you know just guys to have the autograph so and then it's about you just know that savory and such part about that shit so it's just in there just so but and so it's nice and yeah so that's good yeah and maybe this that's I'm fast little butter because she didn't just talk about and they I said stories is an option more slow Then I rolled down this fast to pay right. So rather on the side, I will find it. Calculations. Say, if it's still a capital, I'll have money for I and we played stuff. Yeah, they are so that's just yeah, right. So you need but and so you know, you say, but how it's the assets, the earnings less than us funding service, and you that and super as now I do a month. It was just got and says then maybe that's things back. Yes, you're not money for it. God, I mean, it's just so naturally, yes, don't matter. But yeah, no forward. I said, I'm not as that. Yeah, or something. I like also was virus there, and I did a lot of things. I didn't travel. I swear, it's the streets, try the higher some no problem on the face. It's the best. It's the national. I wanted to say that. His things to have the I have the money. And in success, was it some one else. So right, it's all somebody all day cloud how you feel out for example that's going this 30 how many plus million that's so fast and the idea that's like the sound how hey that's out but it's really see that and not seeing probably videos less far and yeah I think bicycle community like sometimes you ought to use that you still that wrong so we don't have this it's on the sign of the most calls on your that's tremendous actually everyone like on a kitchen don't want the I think we are one of the various jobs like that was just down base. I mean, which instead of all the sitting things away. Stand out, let's just look at the next chat to the least form, slice and things and done. Then to the rest on the side, yeah, that kind of like that. But you say that is take them up on my end. Like it's so safe. I think it's hard my good. Still out. Yeah, it was. And like I think well, we're trying to build that. It's not like that. It sounds like it's definitely first time. I was to agree to that. Yes, very actually one of family. Step letter, shoot us, bunch of varieties, small series, making out, and the British arts, our friends, this variety of 6 hours will be a certain period of time, it was like a wearing, I do, and putting this, if you have,
Yes.
Next one, they've only get like it over 8 hours, at least if you don't follow the precedents, when these old come out from, I'm gonna get three, so those should be, I got that side, and I believe there's all stack, and I was, faster in classes. We have about 15 days, and if you have only talk about one side, I think you want to switch, I'm giving you the out switch, another south and another switches, and from another 15 minutes, and then we'll pull back your conversation. I'll do that. Well, we're starting up, and you guys are like, it's STEM, yeah, right, yeah, some other reasons, and yeah, that's, but yes, that's shocking. That's just really awesome. Sorry, we're gonna have a picture at there, and then wrestling the units on out. I put that, and I decided on there. So now let's see inside that stations. I have to sit as night to sit on about things. So the iron I don't say that's and that is the internet. These apps that some that goes as $8 something just big at how your beats long time. It's basically and play and that's sometimes just people on the skills because somebody grand clients and it's sort of on sometimes they look very smart and working on it. And so because it's hard for you how she ended up in absence, and those are my specialists. That's then most everybody. It's not like you have to design like copy the understanding also these the some place to make out it shines you next. Different as one just you know English and that's you my nice feelings each other. What is it? Well, is there why did I what's that? I'll show you 1,000 virtues and now while that lifestyle. That's it. I know you don't let I just like I and see it's bad. Yeah, and he is then in process and can't have that. You'll see a little tough, but your last speaker, it'll say, and it was such about one slave story where you see anything else about father's right this happened with even cross the ice. So the I'll keep it sit down at the names back that side down and then something else off it's the line was increased. Yes, I do drop on sleep that I'm sharing the song like kind of so to myself, but really so I just I get sweating that I start. Is what I'm spring us because Lord accepts. Just kind of exact enough. That's why it's stress. We saw us then thinking about and the second one I know it on that real that idea. You really know that when the artist at the sir Ace and Springers showing the show back up. Okay. Check that inside by the way, that's the other side. The guys get part of the invested. I think those ones, I mean, there's a shall be a butters. So, right, on large, then you must be able to sort of have special ideas. So, actually, as far as I'm trying to log on this up, it is a lot of but starts, first, I know it would be asking some blind to go. I have it so hard what it is in front of us. We just, you know, we can't go. And so, do that, started cheating last, so it's just you and I just said, and that was. It's what everybody said, okay, stop and then I was with the line, okay. next time with that big on the way down when she has next shit so like that story has this special is about I strong some strong both no that is that there's a new sponsor and I'm realizing her that data is fine but now I have this I someone read his stocks this friend who were like but me yeah you guys yes since get my back up and so it's states upon that allies to rehab place for like I and that football night so that's super sort of fair so now you can have that but so like steam and type stack and then just that's a way to find out like I had success and your west from that is there so one mile I still is right I did want the next for this time international one and now these sort of you cannot be which is that's great. I was, yeah, I was at there. I was something like I read it and the sound, and now he makes it. No, really, I mean, it's just, yeah, I think it's, I understand how it's less. Straight to the Belgian mode, it should be preservation. I had possibility like becoming a class. I'll get the or by the web. I was, I'm really had so, it's something to see all of this. That's the best. We can go to some short, something like around the shoulder. Fine, not. To stop that, so you guys think that great clients on here. So what did y'all say about this out here? It's so having stuff on it. I know the students to the hair, especially slide house. And we started using some money. We're going to stand you to just like start to that's so you so sorry. So it's all off, but yeah, it's like yeah, so started to stand you. It's like playing. Okay, I had for learning to start that. It's probably not very very other thing that help. First of all, I'm looking this day, sorry, I'm not saying, but I was done to learn how to not find the best areas to so the honest that sounds how well into the brain, you just, not sad, see, or I'm reached out, I don't want to use my own. I sad of like, you got or more, and my option on sad, yeah, I think. So I guess I say there's old man's dad, there's the next time there, it's a big you that has been altered, I would set there on small haters, thanks and like, yeah, plus I it's like, yes, really up now. So hearing the comment is that like so like stuff we count it might be see to follow something up like but then I have this family so it's like I not that is very especially on for that is already so making like another stuff and I know that the feature. It's but it's when you're out so kind of make this stuff you have that in things yeah because of that you're not telling me for days just get that is what it found it's yeah it's I started looking up the right so there's a kind of video story first we forward the biggest was so I have to have a watch funds stuff that's that I was to then I but now they have a lot of just like I know how you're brought out it yeah so that they not right I'm straight green after so I said really she on the how you play this hard is sounded yeah and I'm going to this seriously actually first of all I agree to that so this you know I'm saying that for is generous to the cast they're only happy we can do it how we close there I found to do something not to do so I was like you know I saw some very nice to plan but didn't see the best how the men was stressed that all have every guest we get used to buy it just like this yes it's just like yeah that's so I like it down that's history of the thousands by 79 months it's not that she's down it's just best I will bring around to the outside this is least then on the choir so really that's fire section you just your office let's it's what's and there and I already say sit down class with a sounds like every sign out is that it's the last step which we got down it was not like I just scared me I don't like happy as well with my opinion whatever I can say on that stuff I'm in the man like a stress there's not now and I don't have many signs I stand up but I they talk about that and tell the guy I was having that not yes so I didn't but it's out I thought it didn't have so I think here's the fastest that's steady to search now I don't race and right now you don't have any cars starting to be on right to manage types they are always spikers that when and they so yeah and you see them not very low and although at the start you're at like those points that's a reason how I can have what the exciting is your strike that they every time that was so not for inside so they got fast sense that's how I see what's got hard so it's I can't trade and but yeah because that's fine study just test especially exciting getting out of the it's really slow he could also do also in my but he's fire down against that fun is like it was about exactly the chronology like you know I example inside I yeah I should listen to what I did also but I completed this And so we're trying to have sausage. Just trying to sit down and dash to that's my voice thing on it. Got it, but you're like, I could tell the first and I'm sorry, turning my head. So I thought, I was up with my big hour. I'm like, thanks, sorry, I'm sorry, and a lot of it, I haven't seen it, it's found the research and it's not. So, like, we get maybe said, so you got it, they don't need fully excited about it until we want to go behind the bag. Right, it's not notice about it, support, but I love it, the ladies up, and I probably still like, they love swimming, I'm not that, like, so and all of that, sure of us, we'll just sort why you don't think it's sense, they're that, like, hey, how is that? Yeah, from the MCCO, I spend my life. That's not what's the best. That's how it's there. They spend it on swearing that is 1 year. And have been and did not experience with that. They remember about sand. I was like, I really need that. But he's on the phone. It's a little bit that it's basically. And I don't think that they are out of get that's the idea. Our tips, looks like that. Extend on it. If you look at on cost, there's 609 and it's less. Some people are no right. So I just had to that's very not this also. And I had here. Yeah. So funny out there. I love the opposite. So I still really taste on it. Still was trying to go shooting. Yeah, I said it's a lot. Like other tissue there. So this was actually like hunt Jewish when I but that it's not actually stuff and everything. So supposed to have to say what's out in the tell. It's sure after the COVID we're going to use about 3 more minutes. You don't come into the styles. Well, Captain, I was sorry. Go on the and be like fun. Oh, you look at you get that. Yeah, but things now. That's like just reality is song and getting do this. My shit live right against the face. That makes them feel like I make most of my our face. Is what I said, Mom. Yeah, it was swap. Yeah, it's on the boss. And the last thing it was such gonna be right. I know there's tricks for the realization. I think so. I got today. I'm there. Listen, that delusion of it, I just wanted to get oh, that's an announcing player. That is the thing. It's I see. So I check the review one of the stretches. Sorry, it's with the family. Yeah, it's in that was the okay. I got anything. Yeah, you're still sending for you over the shoot. My friend Yax, same items. It's going to be hard. You are actually having on the situations. So that's more like I'm sorry, they stay like family website study. I get that. Let's see your us over at it. For your greatest. You have to ask about it. Thanks. Yeah, guys, they explain it fast. Yeah. For example, special house thing we don't wires and stretch. Recently, not for the song to be right. They don't do the rest of that. Or the bad. When you know it was 6 times. That it's happy to have them business stretches. Has been. Well, yeah, I'm actually, they thought it was bad. Yeah, studying, I could stop it. Yeah, and he thought my thing that is like, and you know, I like interstations like, it was coming as if that's so bad. Or there's so close, you have to that not out of really able to go, maybe I don't make my mistakes. If you have that in so much, yeah, you know, and that's not that. This is why it's so, and I'm desire finish. I've seen people go out. It wasn't just a brain into the big planet. Then it's going to be why stands up their style. Like it stands up. I think teachers there are better. Shouldn't I? Absolutely. And I fully provide solutions. So, you know, yeah. I was like, I see it's hard. Thanks. Go live. Go like that. So it's better. And good luck. Really that's fun. It's a great person. Yeah. So on that, yeah, it's just how, you know, higher. I was sacrificing and we thought she had the bad she's about badly that she yeah but then it's like the chest so it's exactly she will real now the thing is that there's nothing but the side and then lots but I will use the outside I'll have time for it we'll use the see most I know sphere relative all right that's the good side ever trying to get back to Nico that's very very I don't do that and so I get to one conversation you know the hearing big hundreds compared to the very short amount of time I give you before I hope that felt a little bit more luxurious. It's time to talk them. I saw a lot of folks writing things down. Thank you for doing that. Would love to hear a few comments from some of the groups about what came up in this conversation about employers, how to support them. Is there any wonderful ideas about if there were one thing we should be doing next, what should we do? So for anyone who wants to take the floor, here's your answer. I'll let you talk.
So for number 2, service learning was one of the things that Waterloo, I think, that is their option. And, you know, what a great opportunity to partner a class with the business and say, you know, come up with, you know, tasks that are internships and do it ready
vague instructions. So when we get an internship, we can hand them what our expectations are for it. For example, maybe it's managing their social media or, doing something else for that. But to me, that's an easy way, Brian, to help. But Kira's pointing out what are their needs. That can be a branch of that help them support. And then students are learning, the company's setting for the
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Being that we had a great discussion with the career service directors, I'll defer to them if they have anything. Always good stuff.
It comes down to mental this. Let's call it what it is. There are some employers that they don't know where to start. They don't know what to do, and so it was something to add on. They don't place the, depending on the size of the company, depending on how many hats each person is wearing, it's just not realistic. If we have a document, if we have a plan, an electronic document that we can provide that's plug and play, but that makes it easy. If you make it easy, that's the gentle tools.
I'm curious, was that something that you're seeing happen at institutions, or you wish you could do more of at institutions?
I wish I could do more of as an institution, but that very similar to the employers that we work with. We too wear a lot of hats. We do get pulled 32 different directions on a daily basis, and so it's just not realistic. I'd love to be able to. I think again, going back to a shared language, the easier we make it for Louisiana businesses to support Louisiana students, the more they'll do. I think we have great businesses in the state. I've been a part of a lot of those businesses outside of education. It's just, what is the ROI to the business? What is their return on investment to make this investment into students? There are some employers that say, and energy is one. I love internship programs because we get to test drive students. Students get to test drive us. We're looking to hire them at the end. If we don't offer them the job, that should tell them how they do. I can't work that person for. But again, it's then taking it to the faculty and while in the College of Business, which I hear talked about a lot, of course it's easy for the College of Business to do this. This is where this stuff lives and breathes. Let's go talk about the Department of Arts. Let's talk about the College of the Humanities and Social Sciences. Let's talk about things like the ORA, different opportunities. And let's talk to employers about what value they see in an English major or psychology or things like that. And how those folks would fit well in the system. Again, there are a lot of businesses, I believe, gravitate towards that and that do gravitate towards that. But again, it's just got to be clear. It's got to be concise. Plug and play, make it easy, and on both sides of the aisle.
Great. One thing that you mentioned I want to just draw out a little bit more too is the idea that this work-based learning solves a problem for the employers. And that's something that in a lot of Strada's research on this has come out over and over and over again, that the type of work-based learning experience that an employer offers and how they are supported in offering that is best when it's all rooted in the problem they have. So an apprenticeship is a very different thing than it is internship. Right? For example, this is where definitions are very helpful. So when we say work-based learning, those things are very, very different things to an employer, to a student. So it matters a lot how the type of work-based learning that is being suggested or being set up solves a problem. So what you mentioned there is about they want to hire someone full-time. Maybe it's a test drive. That's a very important reason to think about internship programs. So much to be explored there about what is the business problem this solves? And that maybe is a way to, and our Waterloo folks actually talk about that too, starting with the employers. It's that's, what is it for them that they need? That can be a helpful way to start work-based learning. Did your hand up too?
Yeah, I would argue, and this one's, and that's, a student to say on for a long time, that interns solve our talent retention problem in the state. So anecdotally, we see that students intern Louisiana company, they're more likely to stay. And I'm just using accounting for example. Local accounting employers and apprenticeship have to be smart. They hire interns as freshmen after their sophomore year because the new four don't take until after their junior year. And so if they can land them and they retain them as part-time student working while they're in school, by the time they're junior, they already see their partner track ahead of them. And they're like, I'm good.
So there's benefits to the student, to the state, to the employer, right, in many ways. So it is that, what's the benefit to that employer? right? And then if that employer is a pipeline talent that they can keep.
One thing we talked about, just to kind of bounce off that, is kind of all the way on the other side of providing good assistance to the employer. The employer still has to come to the table with skin in the game. And if they're coming with nothing, it's not going to be a good experience for anybody.
That's kind of what we was talking about, to go back to the whole circle. The employer needs to become critical of all the values, because if the employer comes to the table with their needs, then the definition of, is it an intern, co-op, or practicum, they come to the table and tell us what their needs are. And it goes back to the database, the dashboard that we're required to build. If we develop an RFP system for employers to put what their needs are, and then as institutions, we can then bid on it, because then we have to ask the critical question: does our curriculum prepare the students to help with solving that need? And here's, I put the example, I'm used ourselves of Bachelor of Science in Chemistry. We teach them chemistry. Well, what if they get into chemical cells? Does our curriculum prepare them for stakeholder engagement? Do they know how to pitch a ton of chemicals? But that's something we would have to then say, hey, from a co-curricular standpoint, we need to develop that talent pool of stakeholder engagement to prepare that Bachelor of Science of Chemistry to sell a product, because that's not in our curriculum. Should we marry that with business? But if we don't know the needs of a chemical company or a bachelor's that specifically say we need this because we have, and I think you pointed out, if they're coming into retirement, we have 30 people in the pipeline that can retire in the next 5 to 7 years. Where do we as an institution know that and to do their needs? So it's kind of like course sourcing, need sourcing, some stuff we did previously from an international standpoint. What are your needs? Can we provide technical expertise with the talent pool for that alignment? But for us as an industry, where is that in our curriculum? How do we show that up within our curriculum? Right? Are we doing, and this is where the course area come in at, or the thing, can we quickly put these micro credentials in place for customer satisfaction, customer engagement? Because our need to understand nomenclature, and that's in one reaction, and now we got to do customer engagement. But all of these things, where do we put all of this to look at it from a holistic standpoint, to bid on it, to implement it, to then come back a year from now and evaluate it? What is the return on investment? All of this stuff is now connected. Yeah.
That was brilliant. Both, no, analysts stepping,
Well, I was going to ask, I think you mentioned a moment ago in intermediaries and models of intermediaries. Dr. Whitaker, I think in this last legislative session, there was a very big debate between Louisiana Works, LCTC, Board of Regents, Department of Ed, about who's responsible for the curriculum alignment to industry, business industry, the core question you're at. And I think it's a great question. Nationally, there's a lot of states trying to figure that same question out. We've been, wondering the same ourselves, and looking at how in other states there are like industry intermediary partners that help think about it for, say, the chemical industry, or more broadly going to manufacturing pathways, or allied health and nursing, or kind of health pathways. So what they've done in some states to organize that those groups are coordinated to help feed K-12 all the way to, college and university pathways, as well as adult re-education kind of curriculum pathways. So I'd be curious to know whether that's something this task force has some input in. It's already starting to come about because K-12 has put it into the accountability formula that there's some expectation that there's credit you get if you have certain things that are taught. And then who sets that, who approves what's the right pathway for each industry is a kind of big issue, one that you might want to head come to.
Well, and I mean, it is sort of a tangled web, and there are different pathways within the same industry, and obviously, most industries are across a massive swath of occupations. But I will say, with the workforce system reform that we're doing, there is a need to develop something that works better than a workforce development board to get local employer needs up to the state level and into our state plan. And I think there's two things. Well, one, there's the regional needs and the differences between different regions of the state. But then there are consistencies for industry sectors, and then, major consistencies like the need for skilled trades, which is crossing almost all of our industries. So this is something that we'll be tangling with, and we're going to need the help of everybody. Signal that out.
Yeah, but we know it.
Yeah.
Yes, that was very helpful.
2 more minutes. So we had a couple of different ideas, and I just want to drop a name in your hearing. Work integrated Louisiana to like her today. Kind of just
I was really half of it. So I want to say,
Louisiana, but we thought about the question number 2, like who's best positioned if when we start thinking about all the entities we have in Louisiana, but we probably need, I'm going to just say, a work integrated learning czar that's externally facing to business and industry. That wouldn't be necessarily a region person, but we do need an internally facing policy around what colleges, what universities should be producing, and that responsible person and the business responsible person need to be joined at the hip. The question that was asked is, well, who does the person report to if they're not doing the thing right? And so when we start looking at all of the different businesses, the artist formerly known as the C100, we've talked about that, and then you should talk about cable. So if you think about cable and the C100, when they merged, the policy, they became known, the Leaders for a Better Louisiana, maybe business thinks of them more now as a policy think tank that has business influence, right? I don't know if that's true or not.
Can I record that?
Yeah. And then if Lot B is the person that's responsible for that, what does that mean for entrepreneurs, for small businesses, for things? What does it mean for the chemical association and so on and so forth? So what came to mind is the LaSTEM battle. With LaSTEM, we needed to get our arms around this whole STEM education, and we created a network that brought anybody who thought they were doing something with STEM at least somewhere into the ecosystem. We had a board that was responsible for evaluating it, creating a definition, convening all the partners, doing an RFP for regional work, and then holding an entity responsible, and then pick them out of the nest and say, go be great in Louisiana. And so that's how we were thinking that it may not be what we have. It may be something we have to create that is based on what we give it to live on, if that makes sense. So,
and we were talking a little bit about who owns what. I mean, the fact is, we clearly own the piece that is not heavily educational, like the registered apprenticeships belong with us. And we are building out an employer-facing unit with Adam's help. Thank you. But that may have some role around work-based learning, but we can't do the whole thing.
Right.
And so I think
do we create the intermediary that is CareerWise Colorado?
Well, and yeah, I think we really just, as a group of people in this room, are going to have to do a lot of work around this because, you mentioned the STEM Council, and we've been talking about giving more sort of, broader roles to the STEM Council. But again, I'm not sure that like those regional business facing entities, are kind of being figured out and exactly how they gel and should be part of this.
And I'm sorry, my voice back, but I also think like I always feel like cannot be an agency.
Yeah, I think
Government agency, because more like the business community does not look to a government agency for other answers to. And it might be we were talking about like the youth force is how they are doing a great job here. And maybe somebody like that, they can work both sides of that and across the state, or they might just do the Southeast with a different name, expensive now. But somebody like that is doing that kind of work should either be a regional or it could be the entity. So the business community knows where it's not doing the agency. Well, I'm still working.
If I could I just want to make
Okay, yeah, we're not going to get into all of that, but I wouldn't want to end up in a situation where the business community is supposed to go to 5 different places for 5 different things. Like there has to be somehow a single point of contact that's totally few of that.
and this they're in 323, so I want to be on 324.
Yes.
And pass the floor back to you for closing the meeting. Thank you all so much for the conversations. I really appreciate it, and I hope these discussion questions got you thinking about each
Drop a bomb and say good luck.
bye.
The great out for me.
But no, these are very important conversations that we hear a lot of states also wrestling with and thinking about, and there's a lot here you already have. You're already at the table here all together, which is so compelling and a huge opportunity for you all that many states don't have a state. So kudos, and we are all a key part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that excellent discussion. And in fact, I mean, I think I'm just going to make a plea to this group that everybody think through a lot of those sort of patent questions and just came up at the end. I think Hedrick's point that agencies have a certain role and a certain demeanor, and maybe it's not ideal for everything, and that we need other partners, but is it going to be the same partner in every part of the state? Like, how do we think through this? And maybe we can have further discussion about that in our next meeting. I think that would be extremely beneficial from our standpoint. Ebony, do we have any public comments? Okay, we have any public comments from the folks following, right? Oh, that's not public.
Just as I want to add that you referenced it earlier, Dr. Newley, about SCR 33, that was a resolution passed this session, is on the topic of worst work-based learning models. And to the question about kind of the integration of this approach, it is meant to be a short-term, brief conversation on the question of where should we live, because it's a part of Board of Regents, it's a part of Bessie, it's a part of Louisiana Works, a lot of employer interest in it. And so there are examples around the country of it being done differently and housed in different places. But it is a pressing question that does have to get resolved, is where should it live? And is there a good answer for that? That's part of what that most of the agencies that are in the room are kind of named as part of that task force. Have been a few of the other non-profits that we talked about here. It's like thinking about the sheets.
But I do want to make sure that it doesn't just get forgotten. So if we can make sure we mention it in the minutes or any way we need to make sure that we remember what we're talking about before we see each other in September 9th. So I just put that out there. Yeah, resolution, go where it live.
Excellent. All right. And any public comments from the folks behind me?
So let's not forget that nonprofits or employers too. We talk a lot about this.
Yep.
Don't forget those folks.
Excellent point. Thank you very much for that. All right. Before we adjourn, I would like to remind everyone that our next meeting will be held on Thursday, September 10th from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. in this room. And the December meeting date has been changed and is now Tuesday, December 1st at 10 a.m. And we'll update calendar and invitations in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to the Board of Regents staff with more questions, and really thank all of you for your participation and engagement. And I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Second. Thank you very much. Any opposition? Hearing none, then the motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Well, what so it's yes, right. Yes. Okay. At least very. It's facts on it. Then, I don't know.